Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and you're listening to the Astrology Podcast. Joining me today is astrologer Nick Dagan Best, as well as a group of patrons, and we're going to be interviewing people about recurrence transits today and hearing some real life stories from listeners and patrons of the podcast to share their stories about what happened when a natal aspect in their birth chart was repeated in the sky in the future and what events occurred when that recurrence transit happened. Hey, Nick, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Chris, thanks for having me. I've been excited about this all day.
Yeah, as of like 5 minutes ago, when you jumped on online to join me, this is a little impromptu. I like to keep things got to keep you on your toes. I like to do things a little spontaneously. Uranus is on the ascendant right now, and late Taurus rising, so I think that's fitting.
Absolutely. I'm ready.
All right, well, let's do this. Introductory stuff. If you're finding this as your first time hearing this concept, we did just release a big episode on recurrence transits in November of 2025, where we introduced the concept and we talked about a bunch of examples of largely like celebrity charts to show how the technique works. And then we've done a couple of follow-ups already at this point. One of them was on Mars-Uranus conjunctions in Gemini in US history in December. And then we just did one on the triple conjunctions of Venus, Mars, and the Sun that occurred in January of 2026, and how that brought up a bunch of stories in the news that were repetitions of past world events when the same triple conjunction had occurred. So today I wanted to personalize this by actually interviewing some people and talking to them about their life to understand what happened when a recurrence transit came up in their chart and how it can sometimes coincide with really striking events in a person's life when you actually take the time to look through their chronology. And this is something you commonly do, Nick, because you've been using this technique with clients for years, right?
Oh yeah, for the duration of the 21st century, it's something that, as we discussed in the episode, I learned about around about 1999, 2000, and immediately started looking into it, and it even became just a sort of a driving force for all the other types of research I was doing. And I think also because it was something that I'd never read about in a book, but was so powerful and so obviously prevalent in every chart I looked at. It was also sort of the turning point for me that goaded me into spending more time looking at charts and less time trying to learn astrology by reading books. It really sort of pushed me over that edge, realizing I'd run out of road with books, and everything I had to do from now on was my own work, my own observations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because you really do see you start to learn things like really fast when you're using this technique, like what each planet means on its own, what it means in combination, what the aspect between those two planets mean, and what the nature of that aspect is. And then you start seeing like very concrete events when that aspect recurs. So it really does, put you in a much more empirical mindset about learning astrology through what actually happens in these correlations rather than just from like book learning.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I think it's very much like every chart has a relationship between any two planets, and so in the macro, apart from looking at aspects, I mean everyone's chart, whether there's an aspect between two given planets or not, there's some kind of established relationship or an absence thereof between any two planets, and the transiting interactions between those same two planets in some way should always reveal something, I imagine, about what's in the natal chart with regard to that person's relationship between those two planets. Starting off with recurrence transits of specific aspects is just the starting point of a broader approach to looking at planets in astrology. So yeah, this is point A, point one, the simplest sort of example of how this works. But there really is a macro that's all encompassing, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the things I want to do with this episode is I really want to encourage people and show people how to look this up in their own chart. So, one of the things I want to mention, a really great resource and tool that I've been using as I've been researching this more is the what's called the aspect search engine on AstroSeek. So, if you just Google that, like aspect search engine on AstroSeek, you'll come up with this page. It asks you to input what planetary aspect you're looking for. So basically like look up some aspect you have in your birth chart. Let's say you have like a Venus Jupiter conjunction. So you put like Venus and then the aspect. The conjunction is the 0 degree major aspect, the conjunction, and then with Jupiter. And then you would input what date range, which usually like set it to around your birth year and then take it into, let's say, the present, like let's say 2026, and then just hit OK. And AstroSeek will generate a whole list of years and dates in which that same conjunction happened in the sky. And what you want to do is just read through the list and start thinking back to what was happening during those time periods in your life and if anything significant stands out. Now, there's different filtering mechanisms, of course, we learned in the main episode, like if one of the faster moving planets is retrograde, like for example, here's a Venus Jupiter conjunction when Venus was retrograde in 1991, then that's going to stand out probably as being more significant than other conjunctions typically. Also, conjunctions that take place in the natal sign that you had it in your birth chart creates an even closer repetition. So let's say that your natal Venus-Jupiter conjunction is in Pisces. So this recurrence in like April of 1998 in Pisces would probably be even more important for you because it's happening in the natal sign. But those are things that can heighten the importance, but you'll often be surprised at how even during other periods that are not in the natal sign or are not necessarily retrograde can sometimes be just as important. So that's why it's useful to look through your entire chronology. So that's a really useful tool I've been using lately. There's also a triple conjunction search engine somewhere in AstroSeek as well, where you can search out for like three planet combinations. And it's a little bit more tricky. Yeah, so triple conjunctions of the planets, it has like a whole search engine that you can do. Um, I guess this is only for conjunctions, but it's still useful if you have a, like, let's say a stellium or a triple conjunction in your birth chart. You could put the aspect between the two planets, like, let's say a Venus-Jupiter conjunction, but then 80, 2026. You can add in a third planet and say you want to know when Venus conjoined Jupiter and then a third planet, and that they were both somewhat close to the sun, and then hit generate chart. And then all of a sudden it creates this beautiful diagram of the Venus Jupiter conjunctions, but then it tells you, it gives you this whole graph of Venus Jupiter conjunctions, and then tells you when the sun was like anywhere in the vicinity. And over on the right, it shows the orb, so you can filter out what the closest ones are. So, for example, right here in November of 1982, there was a Venus-Jupiter conjunction at 20 Scorpio, and the sun at that time was only about a degree away at 1833 Scorpio. So that's a close triple conjunction of those three planets. Or let's see, later on, here's another one. August of 2003, there was a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in Leo, and the sun was only about a degree away at 27 degrees of Leo. So great way to look up triple planet conjunctions if you have a stellium in your birth chart and you're looking for that. So there's a lot of really great tools out there these days, yeah?
Absolutely. Very cool. It would be really interesting to be able to study three planet combinations that incorporated more than just conjunctions. I'm reminded of a client I had just this past week. I forget if they had Sun conjunct Pluto opposite Jupiter or Sun conjunct Jupiter opposite Pluto, but at the end of this summer, at the end of July this year, we're going to have a Sun Jupiter conjunction in Leo opposite, like in a full moon with the moon with Pluto. And it was basically, it was either an exact recurrence of this person's natal aspect or just sort of the modified version of the Jupiter and Pluto switch conjunction and opposition, but still a very strong dynamic between those same three planets that involved a conjunction and an opposition that was in some form of a repetition or a near repetition, certainly a repetition of the same planets. So things like that, it can get as dynamic as that. And it was really interesting. Like this is a real sort of multifaceted recurrence transit for this person.
Yeah, as I'm getting more and more into it, I'm seeing how important that is, that it can be those more complex combinations is what we're getting into, what we got into this month with the conjunction one, but I'm interested in getting into that even further to see when different, sometimes almost like aspect patterns from a person's birth chart recur in the sky and something really important and unique can happen.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, and it could be, I mean, as we combine this material with the sort of the synodic cycle material, eventually, astrologers can sort of streamline this and think about, well, if someone has a natal Mercury Mars conjunction, how many recurrence transits will they have over the course of their lives, and how well can we plot those out and assign them to certain experiences that people have at certain ages of life, like I've wound up doing with individual planetary synodic cycles and sometimes the joined cyclical combination. So there's also, I think there's a way to put this all together, and ultimately it does belong together. They're like two pieces of string that are meant to be connected.
Right. Absolutely. And I forgot, like Peter from AstroSeek also has integrated recently after we did our episode a recurrence thing that you can look up when you're looking at your birth chart. It'll look on AstroSeek, it'll show a list of aspects below that, and you can click a recurrence button just below that will actually show you when some of those combinations recurred in the future. So here's this one of the screenshots he posted on Twitter, I think back in like November or December, showing where that button is just below the natal thing. So there's definitely some new tools and new features that are coming out and being integrated, and I'm sure there'll continue to be more like in the near future to help people research this.
Yeah, absolutely. The I'll just to finish up on what I was saying, I looked it up. May 1st, 1988, there was a Sun Jupiter conjunction in Taurus opposite Pluto and Scorpio. And so at the end of July, we have that conjunction, Sun Jupiter and Leo opposite Pluto and Aquarius. Anyone born, last week of April, first week of May of 1988, and certainly May 1st, is having a very strong recurrence transit of that, like a three-way exact recurrence transit. So things like that get really interesting.
Nice. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's good for this introduction. Why don't we get to talking to some people, interviewing some people about their recurrence transits? So I'm going to go through an order in that they were submitted today of the people that joined us for this live stream. And the first one was Ginger. So I'm going to promote you to a panelist now. Hey, thanks for joining us.
Mhm. Hello. How's it going?
Hi, Ginger.
Hi, Nick.
Pretty.
How are you?
Good, good, good to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So let me make sure I have your chart correct. Is your chart Virgo rising with Mars, Saturn, and Virgo, right?
Yes.
And that's the focal point of your example is the Mars-Saturn recurrence?
Yes.
Okay. So for people listening to the audio version of the podcast, we're looking at a day chart with 17 degrees of Virgo rising and Mars at 19 Virgo and Saturn at 20 Virgo. So there's a Mars-Saturn conjunction in the birth chart. So it's a important aspect and therefore sets it up that we would then look in the future at other Mars-Saturn conjunctions as potentially being important. So what ended up happening with that?
Well, I have a few dates. Mostly what I noticed over the different recurrences had to do with my career,
Hmm.
which I'm a hairdresser. Well, it's my main bread and butter gig, but I noticed a really big one before I started my career in 2008. And that was on, let's see, July 10th and 11th, 2008. It was at 5 degrees of Virgo.
Yeah, so that would be a recurrence, not just of the aspect, but also in the natal sign.
Hmm.
There it is. So Mars Jupiter or Mars Saturn conjunction at 5 Virgo. And what was happening at that time?
That was a super, super intense period. It was right before, or I guess at this time, I would have kind of been feeling my Saturn return.
Hmm.
But because Jupiter rules over my seventh, at the time I had recently gotten engaged, and the person I was engaged to had a cancer diagnosis.
Oh, wow.
And so after that, and we had a really rocky relationship. It was a very tough relationship. So in the end, what ended up happening was we were together through his treatments, but had broken our engagement off by the end of that summer. So by the time my Saturn return was starting, I kind of started with like a brand new slate, which is how my career came into being after that. So
How long had you been in that relationship up to that point?
let's see, so 2008, maybe 2.5 years.
Okay, that's a decent amount of time.
Hmm. Hmm. So it was actually that, which this is interesting. This might actually be tied into the career. Because of that breakup, I had to move back home because I didn't have anywhere else to go. And
Mm,
the my Saturn return was coupled with a Pluto opposition to my sun.
mm,
So the 2 years following that were very intense. And during that time, I started to like become an assistant in a hair salon, and I
mm,
was a receptionist at that salon. And that is where the recurrences really start to show. It's like every 2 years, every time there's a Mars-Saturn conjunction,
mm.
something happens regarding my career, whether it's I get advanced education or um, yeah, there's just various examples.
Nice. So give me
Mhm.
one of the next ones then that was after
Mm,
this in 2008. Or Nick, you have something?
yeah, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Ginger, you said the relationship lasted 2.5 years. Did it begin
Mhm.
like towards the end of 2005?
It did. Yeah.
Like November, December 2005?
I don't know the exact date it began because it started as a friendship.
Okay. Right.
So, but you're right.
But
It would have been 2 years before that. Or,
but does that sound right? October, November, December of 2005, or you're not sure?
yeah, it sounds right.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, the reason is like that period, Mars was retrograde in Taurus, opposite Jupiter in a T square with Saturn, actually a grand cross with Saturn and Neptune. But those same three planets that you have in a cluster in the first house, it's not a recurrence transit, but you can see how there's this very tense dynamic between those same three planets during this time with Neptune thrown into the mix, et cetera, et cetera. So this is what
Mhm.
I was referring to. I know I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves, but I just wanted to illustrate sort of the other end of where this can go, where even these other sort of dynamic interactions between the same three planets that you have in a co-presence will manifest in something like this.
Mhm. Yeah, that was an intense period.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
absolutely.
Nice. And then I was noticing when that diagnosis happened, of course, the Mars Saturn conjunction was at about 5 degrees of Virgo, which was right on top of the ruler of your seventh house. So to have that
Hmm.
be an event pertaining to the partner at that time makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So what's one of the conjunctions, let's say like the next conjunction that happened after
Hmm.
this in 2008?
So the next one is July 30th, 31st, 2010. It's at
Got
zero
it.
degrees of Libra.
Okay, yeah, it just barely moves into Libra. Got it.
Hmm. So my Saturn return was basically me redoing everything. And so this is when I decided to become a hairdresser. And I moved from Northern California to Los Angeles and went to the Vidal Sassoon Academy in Santa Monica. So it's when, like, this week is the week I started at Sassoon's.
Wow, that's incredible.
So, yeah, and it's super interesting that it's in Libra because I was super poor at this time. Living in
Hmm.
LA, I think I had six roommates.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Living in
So,
Santa Monica.
right. So it's like Saturn has just gone into your second house. And
Mhm.
then, yeah, you're also having a Mars-Saturn conjunction in your second house, which is not great. So it could be like a low point in terms of financial things, but also it's a conjunction. So it's like setting the seeds for the future.
Yeah.
Also,
And
again, there's a dynamic, there's an opposition to Jupiter. Just to
mhm.
point out, like that same
Mm,
third planet is in the mix in a very dynamic way yet again.
Well, and
In a
what's cool about that is that Jupiter's in my eighth, and I had to borrow money from my mom in order to survive during that period.
nice. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. So, but you set your sort of foundation in this new career direction at this time?
Yes, yes. So a couple of like really super simple ones is August 25th of 2014.
Okay. So we jump
Since
forward to the next conjunction, and this time in Scorpio.
Mhm.
There we go.
So at this time, I was in an apprenticeship in Los Angeles. I was going to a really, I worked at a really, really great salon. And one of my teachers from Sassoon's had come out and taught a bunch of classes, specifically at our salon for the people that worked there.
Hmm.
So I have a bunch of photos from this day and the days before and after when she was teaching, of haircuts that were and colors that were being taught to us basically at that time.
Interesting. Okay. So there's kind of a third house, like education type thing going on there to some extent.
Hmm. And
Nice.
then if we jump forward to August 24th of 2016, it's basically the same thing.
Which is,
So by this time, I was working in a salon. I was no longer an apprentice, but I had gone back and I had moved back up to Northern California. So I had gone back to Sassoon's during this week for an advanced training class. And again, my phone is just filled with photos from this week,
hmm,
of haircuts and colors that I did during that class period.
okay. Fascinating. So it just keeps
Yep.
being those important
Hmm.
career development, like turning points.
Hmm.
2016 is a year I'm always focused on when I see Mars Saturn conjunctions because in April, Mars went retrograde in Sagittarius while Saturn was retrograde in Sagittarius. So the Mars Saturn co-presence in Sagittarius was a good 5 6 months long, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I remember it went retrograde right when Prince died, the rock star, April 21st or so. So yeah, it's a really elongated one. And so for someone like you, the recurrence transit could be, months long. It could be half the year in some ways.
Yeah, and I can't remember all of the education we did that year, but we did a lot because actually by 2016 I actually owned my own salon with my sister.
Okay.
So we were going back and it was a thing that we wanted to have in our salon that the people that worked there, us included, we all did advanced education every year.
It also occurs to me there's also a Saturn square Neptune recurrence transit happening at this time. So
Hmm.
it's
Hmm.
Mars Saturn recurrence square Neptune recurrence.
I was
Another
noticing that in addition to that, the Mars retrograde went back and forth across the fourth and the third house. So it's interesting that there was like activity with the sister at this time. Did you start that in the first half of 2016, or is this something that had already started previously in 2015?
Um, yeah, actually, we started our salon in December of 2015, and my sister is a Scorpio rising, so that doesn't surprise me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. So
And
it was a
the Mars direct station was on your Uranus. The Mars direct station was
Mhm.
maybe 23 or something Scorpios, I recall. So yeah,
That's cool. Okay. So it was in
very.
her rising sign and in your third house.
Hmm.
That's brilliant. Okay, so that's that conjunction in 2016.
Hmm.
Were there others?
Yeah, I have one more like silly one and two kind of major ones. The next major one was March 31st, 2020, the one we all felt.
Mm-hmm. Some recollection.
Yeah. So,
So this is the Mars-Saturn conjunction at zero Aquarius.
yeah, so my anniversary is on March 24th. So at this time, my husband and I were moving across country and he had already moved. And so I was wrapping up, my sister still owned the salon, and I took about a year to find somebody to replace me there. That was our deal. I was going to move across country to be closer to my husband's family.
Mm.
And at this time, we had a plan my husband had already moved out here in December of 2019. And in March, I was supposed to drive out to Atlanta to meet him. And because of the shutdown, um, everything at the end there, when I was like supposed to have a going away party at the salon, um, and just the closing everything up in California and coming out here was rushed and frantic.
Mm.
It was crazy. I didn't really get to say goodbye to my clients. I had some clients who were elderly and they weren't allowed to like leave their um, elder facilities. So I was like,
Okay.
I'm afraid I'll never see some of these people again. It was very it was very challenging as it was for everyone. But my husband was supposed to fly out so that we could spend our anniversary together.
Mhm.
And instead, I threw all my stuff in the car, left very hastily um, at the end there, and he drove halfway across the country to meet me so that we could drive back together. So we drove through basically half the United States in about 3.5 days to get here at that time.
And you moved from where to where again?
We were in Oakland, California, and we moved to Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh wow, okay. So all the way to the other side of the country. So that's a huge, huge move and a huge, really abrupt break with your previous, not just living, but also working situation, just like some of the previous ones have been tied in with your career in that way.
Yeah. I think what made it so hard is that it took so long to prepare to leave because
Mm.
I wanted my sister to be set up in the salon and to do well since we were partners.
Hmm.
And to have it end so abruptly, which I experienced Mars-Saturn that way throughout my life. Like things can be very abrupt. So,
Sure. Okay, so that's interesting. So maybe that's part of it, just abrupt
mhm.
endings or abrupt pivots, because that's actually like Valens says, that's what literally one of his significations is like that which is hard or abrupt. So it's interesting that you mentioned that.
Well, and then also too, to find a new job out here in Atlanta, like you have to hit the pavement to do that. You can't, there's not a lot of, you can send out resumes, but that's not traditionally how a hairdresser finds a new job. So I was stalled for 6 months, because salons weren't open.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. And with all of everyone at that stage in like March and April is like scared still of getting COVID and everything. So that
Hmm.
even just getting clients would have been hard on top of moving to a new place.
Yeah.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting. You said your sister was Scorpio rising, so it's like Mars and Saturn just before that, as you're closing down and ending things with her, is like going through her third house, basically, as you're
Mm-hmm.
getting ready to move and have this final split in terms of that business that you've been doing together for a few years.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. Um,
Mhm.
okay, well, that one makes a lot of sense. That's probably one of the most pivotal recurrences that you've had so far in terms of that abruptness.
Mm-hmm.
Were there more after that?
There's one more like kind of silly one.
Okay.
And then the next one that's coming up on April 17th of 2024. I take German classes, and I have a photo on my phone of this day when I was doing my German homework. And it's literally my homework that day was to write out my resume in German.
Okay. Nice.
Like that's what we had to do that day.
Yeah. It keeps being like career work
Mhm.
related for you.
Yeah. And then
To a foreign ear, it's a very abrupt sounding language.
I think it's a
Hard
beautiful language.
consonants. It absolutely is, but it's hard consonants. Yeah,
Hmm.
hmm
absolutely beautiful. But yeah, Mars Saturn, stern.
hmm Yes, yeah.
All
And
right.
then the last one, which is just kind of funny, here in Atlanta or just outside Atlanta, I work as an astrologer in our local Renaissance fair.
Nice.
And the guy who owns the booth, he sent me an email this weekend and it was like, oh, the opening of the Ren Fair this weekend looks a little scary. And it's on April 18th, which is another.
Yes. It's literally on the Mars-Saturn conjunction.
Yeah. And he's like, it looks a little scary. And I emailed him back this morning and I was like, doesn't look scary to me.
Right. I'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you'll be doing readings at this fair, at this festival at this time in April?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's really cool. Well, maybe something really important will happen, or you'll meet somebody important or have an important idea or something about what, setting up the next 2 years of your life.
Yeah. I look forward to it, actually.
Yeah. Nice. Well, you'll have to send us some
Mhm.
pictures of that because that would be awesome to see yeah, how that plays out and everything. That's pretty awesome though. So that's a really good example. And yeah, like you said, almost a lot of those were just super tied in with your work. And Saturn is ruling your sixth house. So I don't know if that's like relevant in terms of that. Certainly the conjunction that was actually in your sixth house was really impressive in terms of that, as well as the
Yeah.
conjunction that was in your second house as well.
Yeah, I agree.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for sharing that example. I appreciate it. And also, you've
hmm
been like a longtime patron. It's nice to finally connect a name with a face. So thanks so much for your support of the podcast over the years and being like one of our named sponsors in the credits.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your work and I appreciate Nick Dagan best. Actually, he was my astrologer earlier or last year. So yeah, thank you so much for everything you do.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ginger.
Thank
hmm
you. Appreciate it. All
hmm
right. Take care.
You too.
That was a great first example to start with.
Hmm.
Thanks for pointing out some of those other aspects as well. And then obviously we're drawing in other things because obviously this technique doesn't occur in isolation since it's like the backdrop is these planets are also going through transiting through different houses. They're hitting like the rulers of different houses. Sometimes there's more complex aspect patterns happening at the same time, as you pointed out. So there's like a way you can simplify the technique. And certainly that's something I've been trying to do over the past few months as we're like easing people into it by like restricting it to conjunctions or other things like that. But it's good to start. Now we're starting to like, heat things up a little bit by making it a little bit more complicated.
Absolutely. I mean, these are your patrons also, so they're following along. They know what we're doing.
Yeah, they're no slouches. They know the drill. They know what's going on. Um,
Absolutely.
okay, so the next person on the list was Jacqueline. So let me put your chart up and let me know if it looks correct. So you have Scorpio rising with a stellium of planets in Capricorn in the third house, right?
Yes.
Okay, so for the audio listeners, we're looking at a night chart with Scorpio rising, and then in Capricorn in the third whole sign house, we have Venus, the north node, Mercury, Jupiter, and the Sun. So that is a healthy stellium of planets in Capricorn.
Yes.
So what's your recurrence example?
So I have a couple. One is just a stellium in and of itself. My grandmother has a stellium in Capricorn and her sun in
Nice.
Sagittarius. And then I have a stellium in Capricorn and my brother has a stellium in Sagittarius. And
Mm.
then all four of my grandchildren have stelliums. One's Aquarius, two are Gemini, and one is Capricorn. And he was just born last week, my new grandson.
Ah, nice.
Um, so yeah, that's just the stellium piece. But my grandmother was not born on an eclipse, and my mother was. And so what my brother and I got was my grandmother's stellium and my mother's eclipse.
Yeah, you're born like right on a lunar eclipse in Cancer. That's brilliant.
8 hours.
And
Wow.
happy
Okay.
birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, happy birthday. How I love when that happens. It's literally your birthday today. You're born January 18th, 1973, and so you're on the podcast today.
It's a greatest birthday present.
Awesome. I love that. And I love the family stuff is something I'm starting to see a lot, and we'll see with I think one or two of our examples later, but seeing family members have a certain cluster, like a stellium in your case, and then having other generations of this of family members have that stellium, which is interesting because then you see the resonance between those two people, but then you realize also that means the birth of that person was a recurrence transit for the older person in terms of those relationships, sometimes signifying an important relationship or something like that.
Yeah, I had a very significant relationship with my grandmother. She was like my other mother.
Okay, wow. Do you happen to have her birth like date
Yes.
or know her? Okay,
It's
yeah, I'd love to look at it.
December 11th, 1931.
December 11th, 1931.
Mm-hmm. In Germantown, Pennsylvania. I don't know if that matters. Oh, you can just do it as a.
I guess, yeah, actually, if I was smart, I could have just done it as a transit chart, but I will actually put it up as a natal chart. Okay, there, wow, okay, yeah. So she's got Mars, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, Venus, Moon, and Saturn in Capricorn. That's really cool.
Yeah, and then the
Okay.
Sun Sagittarius is pretty cool because there was only me and my brother. And for a long time, we were the only grandkids, and it just really tied us significantly to her. And
Hmm.
because my parents were teenagers, like she would take us in for months at a time.
Got it. Okay.
So
So
she was
she,
really
yeah.
other mother for both.
That makes sense. And it goes back to something we were debating in the third and fourth house episodes about whether grandparents were more in the fourth house, the third house. And I was coming down on the third house. And I feel like your example here maybe is another check in the third house box if you had a really close relationship with a grandparent and you have this stellium in the third house.
Yeah, and that would also follow because I think what my connection with her was much more like sitting around the table and talking, whereas my
Mm,
brother really took like much more of like they were his financial role models for life. Like
mm.
my grandparents, that was the life he wanted. That was the life he really like set out to get. So that seemed to be not that, there wasn't a connection there in addition to that, but as far as like what you would see from the outside, that was definitely the takeaway.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
Okay. So what's your recurrence transit example?
Okay, so then I have when I had my first child, I was 16, and that was October 2nd, 1989. And there was a sun, moon, Pluto in my first house. Um,
Okay, so October 2nd, 1989.
yes.
There was say that again, what was the recurrence?
The sun, moon, Pluto in my first house. And then she has that Saturn Neptune thing, um,
Hmm.
which I don't know, just sort of comes up again late. I can't remember where else I found that. I'll like look at all different ones and then I'm like, wait, was that a recurrence? Was that an eclipse? Was that a Venus retrograde? But she has just those two. So I just figured like because they fall so significant for me in the first and the third, I figured that kind of fell in with this. But that was like the start of my adult life. Like I had to leave home because I was pregnant. Um and then that kind of started the string of crazy marriages after that, that there's a lot of recurrences for. But the beginning of like, I guess the second half of my life was then, or the middle part. And it was
Right.
also that Pluto going over my ascendant. But every time Pluto would group up with a bunch of planets in my first house, like some major explosion, at least it felt that way for someone so young, like something major would happen in my life then.
Got it. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Let's see. Nick, do you have any points?
No, yeah, I'm not seeing like the aspect recurrence anywhere unless I'm missing something. There is she has Mars Neptune co-present, or sorry, you're right there, Jacqueline. My apologies, but there is a Mars Neptune square that is sort of triggering that Mars Neptune. But what am I
Hmm.
missing recurrence transit wise?
I wasn't sure if it was like a recurrence transit or just like if it
No.
was significant because like group of planets and like that's just more what I
Yeah.
see moving forward. It's just like a whole bunch of planets set up, big change in my life.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I threw that one in there. The other ones are a little bit more clear, um,
Okay.
Okay.
but
What's
also
your next one?
my next one is my first marriage, which is September 19th, 1993.
Okay. Here
And
we
so
go.
that was the Mercury, Jupiter, Mars. So the marriages seem to
Right.
have like some mix of Mercury, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, something like that. But this one was
Hmm.
particularly volatile, this marriage.
Hmm. Okay.
This
And there's also the square to Uranus, coming from the other side from the natal square, but nonetheless, a square with Uranus is also in the mix in both.
Okay. Yeah. So for the audio listeners, it's like, especially the focal point is there's an exact Mercury Jupiter conjunction in the natal chart in the third house. And then on the day of this marriage, there's a Mercury Jupiter conjunction in Libra in the 12th house. And then, Nick, you're pointing out that the natal Mercury Jupiter conjunction is actually closely square Uranus in Libra from Capricorn to Libra. And then on the marriage date, the Mercury Jupiter is squaring Uranus in Capricorn. So that's really fascinating.
Yep. Yep.
So, but this is in the 12th house, so this is and also co-present with Mars, and this is more of a volatile relationship.
Yeah, very volatile. Eventually he would try to kill me. So really.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
when I
I
saw
could
that it was in the 12th house, I was like, yes, of course it is. That makes sense.
I think that qualifies as volatile, definitely. Um,
Yep.
what okay, so that's pretty good. So this is
Hmm.
1993. What's the next one you
So
have?
the next one is September 16th, 1997. There's a Mercury, Sun, and eclipse conjunction. And kind of I'm not sure if this one is more of an eclipse one or a Mercury Sun, because I also have Mercury Sun conjunct. But this is when we broke up. And like it was a
Hmm.
very hopeful time for me. It was leaving him, it was, not being with any guys for a minute. It was getting out of the mountains where I felt very trapped. And I moved from there
Well,
to Boulder.
it's a lunar eclipse recurrence. I mean, that alone is
Yeah,
is
that's
a,
what she
a
said.
pretty big thing. Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought it was Sun
Yeah,
Mercury. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good one. So it's literally the day after a lunar eclipse in Pisces in your fifth house, which can be also connected with romantic partners, and that's an exact recurrence of your natal lunar eclipse. So you decided to leave him at this point?
Yes. And
I
I left him. There was another relationship kind of like brewing on the side. It wasn't like a positive or anything, but within that month of September, I left him and hooked up with the guy who would eventually become my third husband, but not yet. Um, and
can
he,
I ask
the
something else? because 1997, it's not unlike the last example with Ginger. In 1997, we had a Mars retrograde in Libra opposite Saturn in Aries. So once again, not at the, by the time you actually left him, that opposition had moved on. But for a good half of like the first chunk of 1997, we had this ongoing Mars-Saturn opposition, which would be an ongoing recurrence of your natal Mars-Saturn opposition. So you can imagine like the months, maybe if you met this future third husband earlier in the year or something like that, maybe that coincided with that opposition, or the breakdown with the existing husband was reflected with those events going from about January, February, right up until about June, off and on.
He actually tried to kill me on a Mars-Saturn opposition in 99. So yeah,
Oh,
it was a
Oh,
okay.
significant opposition in our relationship as far as like
this the second partner did.
the first partner, actually left him long before he had tried that. Felt guilty, went back, and then that happened. But anyway,
Got it.
yeah, that did happen over a Mars Saturn opposition. It was
Hmm.
close to, wasn't quite my Saturn return. It was coming up though.
I'm really
97 and
sorry.
99 both had the Mars retrograde oppositions with Saturn. There were two in a row. So yeah, both years
And
in a row. Sorry.
his anger came from this because like right after I left him, I connected with this other guy, and that actually started. I met him the first time at my first wedding, and I didn't, really notice him. Actually, didn't even remember until he pointed it out years later. But um, I don't know if that fell into like the 12th house thing, like the things we don't see that are brewing under the
Mm.
surface sort of thing. But um, yeah, but the connection just kept like from a year later till I left, it just kept escalating until it was like, I'm out.
So one of the things about the eclipse, though, when you left this relationship, is that it was also a South Node eclipse, which is your natal one. So that's crazy that it was a recurrence, not just that there was a lunar eclipse when you left this relationship, but it was a lunar eclipse happening on the South Node. So it was a little bit
Mm.
more
Hmm.
specific even in terms of that nodal relationship. And I'm sorry to hear about the event that happened later. Do you know the date on that in 1999?
August 25th, 1999.
Oh, hold on, 25th. Nine. Okay, so yeah, there it is. So Mars was transiting through your first house, and it was opposing Saturn in your seventh house. And um, yeah, I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but that's a recurrence of your natal Mars placement at 12 degrees of Sagittarius, opposite to Saturn in the eighth house at 14 degrees of Gemini.
It was, I thought, like I've looked at this chart before separately, but what was significant to me was just that it was the first and seventh and the 10th and the fourth because it happened between myself and my partner and it happened at home and the police came. So it's like boom, 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 boom.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And you pointing that out makes me see also like the Mercury Venus conjunction, which is itself kind of a repetition of your natal Mercury Venus conjunction,
Hmm.
actually with the North Node. So it's a Mercury Venus North Node conjunction, while
Right after.
Venus is with a natal Venus Mercury North Node conjunction.
It occurs to me also that Mars in Scorpio had stationed direct conjunct your Uranus like around May or so, May or June. So it's moving off of the stationing direct on your Uranus and to yet another opposition to Saturn. It was another 97 and 99 were both years with repeated Mars Saturn oppositions. But even like, the fact that it resulted in violence and that Mars had sort of launched, so to speak, its direct station from your Uranus, I think speaks to that.
Is there anything there that speaks to, because I'm not good at assigning the signs or planets to body parts, but it was around my throat. Is that any of those? Is that like Leo
Well,
or
well, Saturn's
Mm,
in Taurus.
yeah. I mean, it could be that. That's the
Yeah.
only access
Yeah.
point that we have for assigning body parts is like the zodiac signs.
But
Yeah,
yeah, you
so
saw
that,
there the Mars went direct on the Uranus there in June.
yeah, I was just backing up to
Yeah.
see what you were talking about. So it was a retrograde that went back and forth between first and 12th, and then this was building up, and then so Mars was still coming off of basically the retrograde, the long retrograde in Scorpio that had been building up for 8 or 9 months before this.
Right.
Mm.
Just like when the breakup happened in 1997, that had also followed a period of this extended Mars-Saturn opposition. So it's almost like, yeah, the breakup and then the act of violence, they're 2 years apart, and both of them are sort of a little bit after there had been this extended Mars-Saturn opposition, probably just the tension building.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
that definitely aligns. That's what it felt like back then.
Mm.
Like constant, just escalating all the time.
And it demonstrates what we had talked about before, which is just that the aspect recurrence that's also a retrograde involving the slower moving planet, that those ones tend to stand out more in the chronology than others. So luckily, good news is that that doesn't happen frequently. It's like very infrequent, so that's good. Are there any other ones that you would notice that you wanted to point out?
Yeah, there was a second marriage in 2005 that involved a Mercury, Sun, Venus, Neptune conjunction. It was
What was the
February
date?
16th.
Okay. Okay, here it is. So February 16th, and we're looking at you're looking at the Sun Venus Neptune conjunction you said?
Yes, and kind of Mercury because it was in the mix. We were talking about getting married that whole week. We just went to a justice of the peace, but the person that I'm marrying here is so I kind of left both of those guys in the dust and went with someone else like this is a mess and I can't deal with this anymore. And I
Hmm.
started dating someone else and this is him. Um, and the 12th house thing connection to like those that stellium to the 12th house, it's like what's happening is this marriage and there's some kind of like wanting to make home stable, but there's all kinds of instability, outer planets there that like that's not what it was. And then the Jupiter and the 12th, like I feel like whenever there's things there, like a line up there, I often have secrets that I don't find out about it for years.
Got it.
Mm.
And this is another Mars-Saturn opposition
Hmm.
by by
Oh,
Sun.
is it? Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah. So Mars is in early Capricorn and it's in a sign-based opposition already with Saturn at 21 Cancer. So it's coming up on that. So that's interesting in terms of that showing up again is really important as your natal aspect. That's one of the closer aspects in your chart. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, and then later that year, Mars would go retrograde over your descendant, but we don't need to go there now. But that's the first thing that occurs to me, and it would be square the Saturn, so that those planets would be triggered again. But yeah, this is, I mean, it's amazing the way this seems to follow you through marriages. Were you into astrology at this point, or
I
maybe now you wish
was
you had been? Okay.
I was, but I actually grew up with astrology sort of in my side view. My grandmother, not the one that I was super close to, but on my mom's side, she was very she cast charts like the old-fashioned way, like with books and
Mm.
stuff like that. Um, so I always knew about it, but the astrology that I was practicing then was modern. And so, which ruins my entire chart, like completely changes it. It makes it not my chart at all. I also had no idea I was born on an eclipse. So a lot of the things that I think I would might have seen, I didn't really see. The Mars Saturn, as important. I know I did see that, but my focus then was primarily on where's Pluto and like what is it hitting now because it
Hmm.
kind of followed me for most of my life.
Got it.
Fair.
Yeah. Um, all right. Did you have any other recurrence examples?
He and I divorced on July 1st, 2015. That was a Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, or Sun and Mars and Jupiter, Venus separately.
Sun, Mars, and then Jupiter, Venus conjunction. Okay, yeah. So that was an exact Venus Jupiter conjunction around 21 Leo.
Yes.
Hmm.
Um, And I think Venus goes retrograde in Leo somewhere.
Yeah,
We got
shortly after.
over that
Later that
retrograde.
month. Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Right. And that previous husband had tried to had harmed you during that Venus retrograde 16 years earlier.
Yeah, I don't like Venus and Leo.
No,
Huh.
apparently not. Yeah.
Um,
Um, well, this one, though, I mean, this is a Venus-Jupiter. This is a recurrence of the natal Venus-Jupiter conjunction. And something important to point out here is like Venus in the natal chart's at 8 Capricorn and Jupiter's at 21. So it's like some people, if they're using super tight orbs and they're not paying attention to sign-based aspects being important, they would overlook that that's actually a Venus-Jupiter conjunction in the chart, even though it's not super close. But then you have this kind of demonstrates that that is a true conjunction in your birth chart because then we have a really important event taking place literally the very day of the Venus Jupiter conjunction, which is you leaving this relationship basically.
mhm.
All right. Was that the last example that you had found?
I have one more, and that's like the happy ending.
All
Um,
right.
the first guy that I left my first husband for, um, we started dating again, and he moved back home August 16th, 2016.
Okay.
And
Oh
then
wow.
yeah,
So
so
this is a
Mercury,
major
Jupiter,
recurrence.
Venus. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
yeah, big one. Yeah.
So for the audio listeners, we're looking at a chart where on this date, August 16th, 2016, Mercury is conjoining Jupiter, Venus, and the North Node in Virgo, which is a very strong repetition of the natal Venus, North Node, Mercury, Jupiter conjunction in the birth chart. So you decided to get back together with him, and this is when he moved in.
he had actually moved out of state when we broke up in 2001. And I realized that I was looking for him when I would think of other people. So I was like, well, why don't I just see what's going on with him? So called him, and yeah, he moved back like 6 months after my divorce was final and moved back in.
Okay. Wow, that's
It
amazing. And then of course, this is also it's like Mars is conjoining Saturn closely, so that's also kind of a recurrence in terms of important Mars Saturn things happening at the same time.
Hmm.
even more so because she has Mars Neptune opposite Saturn, and that's Mars Saturn square Neptune. So it really sort of again ropes in three planets as opposed to two,
Hmm.
in a modification of the natal configuration. So yeah, this is I mean, it was written in the stars, Jacqueline, that eventually the right guy would come around, I guess.
Yeah, he came around a long time ago. I was like,
Right.
sorry,
Come
having
around
a Pluto
again.
transit right now, so you'll have to go until that's over. Um,
Right.
and then we got married. We got our license January 28th of 2019, and our ceremony was in August. And there's for the January, there's Jupiter, Venus,
Hmm.
yeah, in Sag.
Yeah, there's a Venus Jupiter conjunction, which is a recurrence of your natal Venus Jupiter one. Fascinating. So again, you keep doing stuff on the Venus Jupiter conjunctions, either leaving a major relationship or having an important good turning point in other ones. So that's beautiful.
And then the wedding, and this one was actually um like you have to plan a wedding date, and it comes like there's all these other factors that come in, but he
Hmm.
this was his idea. Like he was like, let's go get it today, let's go get it today, and he was super excited about it. And I was bummed when I was first looking for the Venus Jupiter in our like wedding ceremony one. And then I was just like, well, I'll just pull up the day we got our license, because that is when I like changed my status on Facebook, blah blah.
Hmm.
um and there it was, and I was like, oh cool, because it usually, yeah, it does mean good things for me. It's meant that in like career stuff, and you know just having a good day that day, I've noticed.
Hmm.
So yeah, it was really cool that it was there. And then for
Yeah.
the ceremony, we had Sun, Mars, Venus.
Sun, Mars, Venus. Okay.
So that was August 26th of 2019.
There we go. So yeah, Sun, Mars, Venus conjunction and sort of similar to your natal Sun, Venus conjunction in the birth chart. So that's pretty good.
And
Yeah.
there was also that that eclipse period when the actual eclipse happened in, I think it was June, we were planning to get married in like the state park. We were gonna have something super simple with like a food truck and no big deal. And he was working at the Stanley Hotel, and they found out
Mhm.
that we were having our wedding in a state park, and they were like, "No, have it here," and gave us a wedding at the Stanley Hotel for like nothing, almost nothing. It was like $8,000, which at the Stanley Hotel is usually like it's outrageous to get married there. So
That's
like a
amazing.
wedding I never ever would have even dreamt of. Like all the girls in Colorado want to get married there, and I never even thought of it. And it was the coolest thing.
Yeah, as long as there's not like a blood pouring out of the elevator event or something like that.
We didn't have any of
Oh,
those. Really good
is
The
that
day.
the
Stanley
elevator
Hotel.
Kubrick used?
It's
Oh,
the
the
Shining
Stanley. Okay.
Hotel,
Yeah, that's the
right?
Shining.
Okay.
I think it's where it was written. It's not where it was filmed, but it was where Stephen King wrote it.
He filmed it in England. Kubrick wouldn't leave England for
Hmm.
anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that was all
Got
pretty
it.
nice, I guess.
Nice. Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing. That's a great set of examples. Thanks for being so
Right.
open and sharing all of that. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you, Nick, for being here. That's the greatest birthday present.
Oh, happy birthday.
It
Thank
was
you.
the greatest birthday surprise.
Awesome, Jacqueline. That was really good fun. Thank you.
All right. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Thank you.
Awesome. That was great. We are learning lots and lots of things and also just like seeing how some of the planetary meanings can come out so starkly. That was one of the
Mm.
things that surprised me the most when we did our first episode, but it continues to impress me so much that I want to do like a series now on the planets and different planetary combinations. Like this month, I started doing a whole list of Mars-Venus conjunctions in people's natal charts, and then sometimes what would happen during recurrences. And it's getting me excited about doing that because it provides such a clean access point sometimes for understanding those combinations.
Yeah,
Yeah. All
I'm having a
right.
blast.
Sweet. All right. Let's go to our next example. So that was three. And then Karen was going to be our next example.
Yeah, so I have Uranus there at 23 in Sagittarius in the second, and Jupiter 23 in Aries. So they're trine, and they came back to a trine in June of 2015.
What was
Um,
the date, or is there a
I have
starting date to look at? Let me,
June 21st was like when it was exact, I believe.
June 21st. What year again?
2015.
2015. Okay. So let me share that chart.
Oh, yeah, I see it
S-
here.
So there's a natal, for the audio listeners, a natal Jupiter at 23 Aries, trine Uranus very closely at 23 Sagittarius. And on this date, we're looking at Jupiter at 19 Leo, very closely trining Uranus at 20 Aries.
Yeah.
So what was going on at this time?
Yeah. So well, I guess there's kind of more backstory, but right on, there was a new moon in April, actually, on April 18th of 2015, and that was at 28 degrees there in Aries. And that was like the moment, I think, where I realized that I needed to get out of the relationship I was in because I realized that my partner was quite volatile and violent, right? So there was a moment right there. But I went and I got help for that. I got a therapist and started working towards breaking up with this person. And we set a date, not knowing at the time about the astrology, of July 9th to, get my finances in order, get everything ready so that I could leave this relationship safely. And so I did that on July 9th, but a couple of weeks before that, I was working at the time I was working with a startup, and part of my compensation was equity. And a couple of weeks before that, so mid-June, or probably around this time, June 21st, we were, some of us early employees were asked if the company could buy back some of our stock. And basically just, I was able to get a bunch of cash to help me to make that breakup. I didn't realize it was going to happen at the time, of course, but um, it allowed me to, keep my apartment that we had been sharing. and keep like my lifestyle and not kind of have to lose out on the lifestyle that I was living as well. Not, so that was the finances part of it. And then
How long
a
had you been in
couple
that relationship?
um it had been almost 2 years
Okay. Yeah, so
by
that's a
the time
pretty
we ended.
got it. So yeah, you'd been together. That's a pretty significant, chunk of your life, especially at that point.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah. And this was all
Sounds like
right around Saturn return too.
sounds
Got
like it
it.
was the duration of Saturn going through Scorpio. Like you're breaking up as Saturn is leaving Scorpio. So if you were together for about 2 years, like the relationship was about Saturn being in your first house.
Interesting. Yeah.
Mm.
Haven't thought of it that way. Yeah.
Mm.
And then, so this is great though. So you have a sudden like financial windfall from work that allows you to make this break sort of suddenly, which you've been wanting to do for several months up to this point and had conceived of already. But then you had this sudden opportunity to maybe make a cleaner break than you could have otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that money probably would have come in like, yeah, end of July, maybe August time. But at the same time with my work, so this was probably, I remember not being more than 2 or 3 weeks after the breakup. So we're talking like end of July. My boss came to me and said that we were about to open an office in Australia. And would I be interested in relocating, moving up into a manager position, um, like promoting up into that, getting a raise, and going out to Australia. So felt like that was, I was thinking about how you've said before about the sixth house being employees or like managing people. And so I moved into that role by September and was managing people remotely before moving out to Australia in January. And yeah, it was just a um, big career move.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
That's a great, like, suddenly, like, very fortuitous career development as you have, like, the sort of natal signature there in the second house of finances and the sixth house of work. And then the transiting recurrence of that signature is happening in the sixth house of work and the 10th house of career. And then you have this sudden, like, fortuitous upward jump that's happening in terms of your career. So you move to Australia, and then how long are you there for?
I was there for all of 2016. So
Got
I
it.
moved out
Okay.
there 24th of January 2016, and stayed there for a year. And I think, when I look back on that year as well, like it was partly like moving out of Silicon Valley for a year and having a bit more of a work-life balance and having a bit, more time and resources to explore stuff that I was interested in. It was the time that I started practicing more yoga, learning about astrology. And so they have since both become two parts of the work that I do in the world now as well. So um, it just kind of opened me up to this other path as well that I run alongside that digital work.
Nice. That's beautiful. So it
Yeah.
was really the
Mm.
start of a number of major things that turning point in your life that recurrence of the trine kind of unlocked.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, and
Yeah.
it's
That's a
also
great
cool
story.
that and it's also cool because it wasn't just a recurrence of a trine, but it was also the same phase relationship where in the natal chart, Uranus is the earlier planet that's in Sagittarius and it's trining Jupiter, which is in Aries as the later planet. And then in this chart, when this happened, Uranus is the earlier planet in Aries and it's trining Jupiter, which is the later planet in Leo. So I'm sometimes fascinated by that as well when it's not just the same aspect, but also a recurrence of the phase in which the aspect is taking place as well, which is not a requirement for the technique, but it is one of those additional factors that seems to further specify the most important ones versus ones that are sometimes less important.
Mm, very cool.
Hmm.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, was that your main one, or have you noticed any others?
Just as I was kind of looking back with this story as well. I'm just looking at what I had written down here. Yeah, just further on the story about moving into yoga and astrology and stuff. I think that
Mm.
this, if you pull up maybe December 15th, 2019, I think there might be something else with this as well.
Okay. So let's see.
Um,
So there it is.
2019.
Oh,
2019. Yeah.
oh, 2019, sorry. There we go.
I only just did this a few minutes ago, but I think that um, they should be trining again. Where are they? Capricorn and
Yes,
Yeah.
they are. Yep. Yep.
So
yeah,
for the audio listeners, it's like Uranus is at 2 Taurus and it's trining Jupiter at 2 Capricorn.
yeah. And that, so on December 14th, I graduated out of my yoga teacher training, my first yoga teacher training there. Um,
Oh
so yeah,
wow.
just that day before. Yeah.
And yoga is one of the things you got into at the previous trine, right?
Yeah, like I started practicing more at the previous trine, and here I
Okay.
finished my training and started teaching basically. Yeah.
Nice. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I like that.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, so that's something we'll
Venus,
have to
Pluto again.
Okay.
Venus. Oh yeah, Venus Pluto recurrence.
All
Yep.
right.
Nice. So yeah, double recurrences, and that's cool seeing that's something we'll have to pay attention to is I guess we had like one example of that, Nick, in the big episode, but seeing somebody have a signature and then watching the entire context of that cycle, especially with an outer planet being important every time the next major aspect hit. But this is a good example of how sometimes those cycles might represent like points in the continuation of something as a narrative in a person's story. In this instance, like yoga becoming starting to do it
Mm.
more on the first trine and then actually becoming a teacher of that in the waning trine.
I also love that the sun happens to be conjunct natal Uranus. You know, we sometimes it's really easy to overlook the transiting sun, but it's curious since there is that recurrence transit happening involving Uranus, having the sun on natal Uranus is, you know, it's not nothing.
Mm, nice.
Hmm. And like the
For
sun,
sure.
going back to the April 2015 too, like the sun, or that was a new moon, so like the sun kind of was there too.
Mm.
It's like bookending it a little bit. Yeah.
Right, transiting Uranus opposite your sun, so it's kind of a double
Mm,
sun Uranus transit. You know,
mm,
yeah, wild, really good.
cool. Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That was amazing.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Yeah,
Cheers.
thank you, Karen.
All right.
Love
Take
it.
care.
Thank you so much. Take care.
So we did just a Karen. There was one more with Lauren for sure. If Lauren's still here. Hey,
Hey,
Lauren.
Lauren.
Hi guys, how are you?
Doing
Good, thank
good.
you.
Thanks for having
Welcome.
me.
Yeah. So here, could you confirm your chart and just look at this and let me know if it's correct?
Yep, that's me.
All right, perfect. So what is your natal signature and what's the recurrence transit?
So I actually have two, if you're interested.
Okay.
I found another one while everybody else was sharing. The first is so it's like mid-March of 2016. I don't know the day of the exact square between Venus and Mars, but I believe it was like March 12th of 2016.
March 12th, 2016.
I believe it's right around there.
And it's a recurrence of what again?
Venus and Mars in a square.
Ma- Mars square Venus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so for the audio people, Venus is at 12 Virgo, square Mars at 13 Gemini natally, and in the transit chart, Venus is at 0 Pisces, square Mars at 2 Sagittarius.
yeah, so I was off a couple of days, but so on March 8th of 2016, I was in a car accident and I broke a bone in my right hand. And then
Hmm.
on March 17th, I had surgery on that hand to repair the bone. So they kind of straddle the exact square.
Hmm.
I mean, there was
Yeah.
also an eclipse the day of the car accident. There's a lot of other things that are happening in the chart. But I did find the like Mars Venus square to be striking as well in the mix of all of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
I mean, that's a pretty major. How major was the car accident if your hand was damaged that much?
It was pretty significant. It's amazing that like that was the only injury to come out of the car accident. I lived in the mountains of North Carolina at the time and I was traveling to work. It was dark out and I rounded a like curve and there was a log truck going about 20 miles an hour and I was going 60.
Oh
And so I
no.
swerved at the last minute and the impact was on the right side of my car. So it was kind I mean it was kind of wild that that was the like my ribs were also contused, but other than that, the bone in my right hand, the little bone that like connects your to your middle finger, that broke because I think it hit the gear shift. So
Hmm.
um
Yeah, that's scary. I mean, especially the log truck. Like you say log truck to any millennial and you're thinking like Final Destination type
no.
Yeah, right.
scenario. Uh,
Yeah.
s- but I was just thinking about the natal Venus-Mars square with Mars in the eighth house and just like having an event where you could have died potentially at that time if things had been worse, but still walking away with it with a major injury is definitely significant in a Venus-Mars square context.
Yeah, and it was all there was also an eclipse, I believe, later that day or the next day after the car accident that was conjunct Saturn, I believe, or at least close to it.
Yeah.
And you'll notice
Hmm.
that Saturn squares Mars and is opposite Venus, so like intimately connected to that pair. I actually have another
Hmm.
example in a little bit of a different car accident, and that one was a recurrence of Mars and Saturn square. So,
That's actually a great point. So th this is also a recurrence, not just of Venus, Mars, but also natally, you have a Mars-Saturn square,
mhm.
and this was also like a Mars-Saturn conjunction, which is like a variation of the recurrence transit idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
another worthy mention is so exactly a month later, on April 8th, I was in another car accident. Somebody rear-ended me on the highway, and I had just walked off the lot with my new car that I put 3,000 down on and didn't get gap
Good Lord.
insurance. And so I believe that there was a Mars retrograde too in Sagittarius
It was about
after.
to go. Yeah, just after. Yeah.
Yeah, so the Mars and Saturn are also kind of like activating the T square from a different perspective as well. So there's just a lot
Hmm.
happening in my chart during this time. I mean, it's also worth noting that like my natal Mars is in Gemini, which is the hands, and in the eighth
Right.
house, which is debt, and both of these car accidents put me into like a significant amount of debt as a young adult.
Yeah,
Um,
that makes a
I
lot
mean,
of sense.
there's a lot. I probably could talk about all of this for a really long time, so I'll stop there. But
Well,
So
thank you
yeah,
for
so
sharing.
so Mars is about to go retrograde. I see it stationed just later there in April, so it's practically almost stationary already, opposing your eighth house Mars while it's transiting your second house. And yeah, so that you didn't have insurance on the second car, so that put you into like debt at that
mhm.
point.
Yeah, and the hand surgery too. I mean, I had just graduated college. I just started my quote unquote first big girl job. I worked for like $11 an hour.
Mm,
Um, and so all of it put me into a significant amount of debt, um, which, was a huge experience for me as a young adult. I mean, it
Mm,
definitely flavored that the first few years of me like being fully on my own.
right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just
mhm.
having that conjunction happening in your second, this being in the middle of Saturn transiting through your second house for 2 to 3 years, and even just Mars ruling the ascendant, so having some connection with the body and the physical vitality, um, and getting both of those at the same time. It's interesting how that's like intertwined for you, both in terms of bodily things as well as the financial aspect.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
And you said you had another one?
Yeah, I do. I have a couple more actually.
Okay.
But if you want to stick with Mars Saturn for a second, I can actually talk about my third car accident. These, unfortunately, car accidents are a theme for me.
Oh no. Okay.
Um,
Mars
I'm
and
I'm
Gemini.
so
sorry I laughed.
it's okay. I have to laugh at this point. It so in On October 27th of 2019, there was a Mars-Saturn square. Mars was in Libra in my 12th house, and Saturn is in my third house, yep, in Capricorn.
Hmm.
It was about a week after that square, I got into another car accident. with a wood chipper, and there's something
Oh my
something
God.
there. I don't
Yeah.
there's something about
No,
that
it's
that
Fargo.
yeah, and I actually broke my right wrist. So same
Huh.
arm. Didn't have to have surgery, but did break my right wrist. And
So what was the exact date? You said it was a week after the square?
it was, I really tried to find the exact date. I believe it was like that first week in November of 2019.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So they're still really close. So for the audio people, Mars is transiting the middle of Libra in the 12th house, and it's squaring Saturn very closely in the middle of Capricorn in the third house.
Hmm.
Okay, so what you injured yourself again on the same hand, and then that's rough.
Yeah, I was on my way home from like a vacation too. I like was driving back and broke my right wrist in two places. And again, I mean, other than that, there were no real like significant injuries. There is always this like undertone of these accidents where like it's really terrible and stressful at first, and then things tend to be like there tends to be a really bright spot. Like, for example, the surgery that I talked about earlier, like a charity paid it off in total. Or
Hmm.
like in a most recent car accident, I got like $7,000 more than I owed on my car. So it's like there's these, it's really,
Mm.
I think maybe that's the eighth house stuff too, right? Like at first it's like kind of triggering and stressful and but then there's some seems to be like financially after some hardship and struggle, financially I end up, you know, working it out.
This third
Right.
accident also had a Sun Uranus opposition, recurrence transit.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. Okay. Um, That's a good point. I'm
Yeah.
back to that point though. I mean, it's interesting how there are some mitigating factors going on, like the Venus squaring Mars might, even though it's problematic for Venus, it might be helping out Mars a bit, but having Jupiter like right there on your ascendant natally in a day chart. I was just
Hmm.
talking to Austin last month, I think in the last forecast, about the protective function of that, and sometimes like either coming out of situations that you might not otherwise coming out of being lucky because the first house represents the body and physical vitality, or sometimes like not having situations like in Austin's case, he has it in like cancer in the first house, and he both rarely gets sick, but also seems to recover surprisingly fast, even when he does get sick. And I wonder in your case if, that's part of the function of what we're seeing here of having some protective function, or even while Mars is in the eighth house, and so that's creating the situation for a difficult financial thing. The ruler of the eighth house is Mercury, which is there in Cancer, and it's like trining Jupiter pretty closely. So there might be
Hmm.
some counteracting potential for even like the financial stuff.
Yeah.
The other thing about the Jupiter, you can see this. Some people, because it's Jupiter is natal Jupiter is in the first, sometimes it's in the 12th. I've even seen it in some case if it's in the 11th house, but at a very sort of late degree of that sign and in the right angle. What winds up happening with people who have Jupiter somewhere in that range very often is that Jupiter just is almost always, like usually or virtually always, in the perfected sign over the course of the year.
Hmm.
Because a perfection cycle is 12 years, the Jupiter cycle is not quite 12 years. But so and because it's not quite 12 years, sometimes you even see people with Jupiter in the 12th, they have that same thing that we're talking about here, where yeah, they always land on their feet. Terrible things can happen around them or to them, but there's a sort of, you never really hit rock bottom. There is some kind of guardian angel, so to speak, that prevents total disaster from happening no matter how bad things get.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
definitely an undertone of that in a lot of the injuries and accidents that I've had.
Yeah. You had a third example?
I did. So in same year, August of 2019, I also couldn't find a date, but I believe it was mid-August, around like August 15th. This is a Venus Mars one, and it's also a conjunction. I told you I had a little bit of a wild card, so it's not a square,
Hmm.
but it's a Venus Mars conjunction, and a little less notable, but I stubbed my toe and broke it. I had a lot of injuries that year, but actually in 2019. But the thing that I thought was kind of interesting about this one is that I broke my toe last week, and I think you guys might appreciate the fact that this is like a Sun, Venus, Mars conjunction, and that is exactly what
Uh,
took place this year or this month. So I've broken three toes, and two of them have had this.
And I think your sun is the midpoint of Venus Mars, I think. Pretty close, within maybe a degree or so. The sun might be just a degree off of being at the exact midpoint of Venus and Mars. So you
I
might have
think
a
you're right.
midpoint picture there. Yeah.
okay,
I have that midpoint as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
got it. So you just stubbed it in mid-August of 2019. In this instance, it wasn't a break.
No, they both were breaks.
Oh,
People
okay.
ask me how I just like break toes, and I just am like walking around the house and I stub it on something, and they break.
You make it sound so
Wow.
easy.
I sounds it has been easy, unfortunately, in my experience. One of the things that I wish weren't easy, but
Yeah.
So with this one, it's like for people listening to the audio, it's like the sun is at 22 Leo, let's say approximately. Venus is around 23 and Mars is at 28 Leo. So we've got a triple conjunction of those three. And then for some reason, fast forward to January 2026.
yeah.
When did it happen?
It was Monday morning, actually, like 9:50 a.m. if you're really wanting some specific, because I looked at the chart, of course.
What date?
Monday was oh gosh, I don't know. This night. Oh, hold on, let me look really quick. The
What is
12th,
today?
January 12th.
Okay, January 12th. Okay, yeah. So, and then Mars is at 21 Capricorn, the Sun is at about 22, and Venus is at 24. This time it's in your third house. So what happened this time, or how did it happen? You broke another toe?
Yeah, I mean, it was similar. I was walking, but in both instances, which is kind of weird, I was walking to the bathroom, and um, in the first instance, I was in the bathroom. The second, I was just in my bedroom, but just, my foot connected with my bed in this instance, and it broke.
Wow, that's really rough. Because I mean, part of what this probably is like I'm looking at your third house because I've had this happen sometimes when there's something that impinges your mobility for a while. It can sometimes show up, or it's shown up for me in the third house, and it's like you have Saturn ruling the third house in Pisces squaring Mars, and so that might be
Hmm.
part of the like natal signature that's going on here. But it's interesting that in both of these instances, it was a recurrence of like Sun, Venus, Mars specifically.
Yeah, I thought that that was really interesting. And I know that, I threw in a wild card with the conjunctions because I think you guys wanted specifically the aspect that was happening in the natal chart, but I just felt like it was kind of striking with both of those examples.
Yeah, I
So
mean that could
Lauren,
open up a whole new like class of
go
things we have
ahead.
to pay attention to, which we kind of started to in the main episode, which is just sometimes noticing for 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 me, what we were noticing was sometimes like starting something under a combination of planets and then that combination recurring the other times important things happened, like what was it? I started studying Hellenistic astrology on a Venus-Mars conjunction, and then I published my book on a Venus-Mars conjunction, which I was linking to beginning versus like conclusion, but maybe there's a whole other class of events of recurrences of a specific category of event in a person's life that just happens under certain combinations, and you just have to pay attention and see what combination that is without necessarily knowing if it's going to be a full the specifics of it. You just have to see what the recurrence is.
Yeah.
This has been a remarkably consistent, thematically consistent series of events. Lauren, I wonder, have you looked at your upcoming solar return?
I looked at the one from 2025, and actually
Well,
the Mars Venus is in a square. They're in opposite positions in that solar return. Mars was in
okay.
Virgo, and is that the one you're talking about, or are you talking about
No,
26?
I'm talking about 26. I mean that's interesting if there was a square in 25 as well that because when you turn 32, you have a synodic Venus and Mars return in the same solar return. So your
Oh,
birthday this year has Mars in Gemini square Venus in Virgo, and very
oh,
close, within a couple of degrees each, with the sun again at the midpoint. So it's even a recurrence of that, having the sun at the midpoint of that Venus Mars.
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but I was in the talk at Norwalk. He's your friend, and I should remember his name right.
Patrick
Patrick.
Watson.
Patrick, thank you. Yep. When he was talking about the I think the goal years or something, right? Isn't
Yeah.
that the
Mhm.
the
Yeah,
technique?
Yeah,
that's an episode we're working on now.
yeah, that's an element of these synodic cycles of the planets. The goal years being the major closest returns. So yeah, the Venus Mars, your everyone's 32nd solar return and 64th solar return has a Venus Mars synodic return. So
Mm,
it's a recurrence and a cyclical return, and all that in one.
Right.
interesting.
Just like just like 32 years ago in 1994, there was a Sun Venus Mars triple conjunction. Not as tight as this time, but same deal. You get those 32 repetitions, 32-year repetitions.
Nice, nice. Well, those are amazing examples. Thank you for sharing those. I'm sorry that's some of that stuff's happened, but it's been nice to see that there's also been silver linings at different points as well. But I hope you heal up from this one
Thank you.
quickly, and yeah, your mobility and everything returns.
Thank you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and everything that you do.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Be
Appreciate it.
careful out there.
I'll try.
Okay.
Please, please. All right. Yeah, I mean that is the thing about astrology is the hard events, the tragedies or the accidents or the breakups and what have you, do tend to register all that much more when you're looking at transit. So yeah, those times just come up more in conversation. It's par for the course. But
Yeah,
a
it's
lot of very generously shared stories today. I'm very grateful to everyone.
Yeah, it's tricky though with research though, is like, the difficult events in our lives sometimes stand out much more clearly and like we know the date of like such and such happening. So sometimes it's harder than to research the good events. Like sometimes people have to dig a little bit deeper for that. So that can be tricky. Sometimes I've noticed in doing some of the big research episodes, like the Houses series, is like not overly focusing on the challenging stuff because it's easier to research because it stands out more clearly, but sometimes needing to, yeah, find some of
Hmm.
the good stuff. But that one was great
Absolutely.
also just in terms of seeing some of the mitigating things and how she could also tell that there was a recurring pattern of silver linings like sometimes happening.
Yeah, and we did have, some good stories. Karen had the story of her Jupiter-Uranus trine, and her company buying her stock back right when she needed money because she was breaking up with a partner. So yeah, there were. It wasn't all tragic. So
Yeah, no. Okay, there was one I accidentally skipped, which was Connie. That I would like to do really quickly. If Connie's still here, I'll promote you to a panelist right now. Somehow on my list, I accidentally jumped over Connie, who was going to be our like third person. And I need to make sure, because you said something specific about daylight times. I need to make sure this chart is correct. Hey, Connie.
Hi, Chris. Hi,
Hey,
Nick.
hi, Connie.
thanks for joining me.
Yes,
What's
daylight time.
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure I set this correctly. So in Solar Fire, you said it was 3:45 a.m. and what? Because you're born in Chicago and there was some wonkiness in the 1940s surrounding how it was recorded, right?
Right.
So what should it be?
Uh, if it should be Cancer rising,
Oh, it is Cancer. Okay.
27. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I got it. Okay, so Solar Fire did it correctly. So for the audio listeners, we're looking at a chart with Cancer rising, a night chart, Leo stellium. What's the signature and what's the recurrence?
The signature is Venus, Jupiter square.
Hmm.
And just a little background, I was looking at an ephemeris for approximately the second week of November in 1996. I had had a feeling more or less that was very similar to that time period. And I wanted to look at that because I had been watching you and Nick, everything that you guys have been doing about these recurring transits and just fascinated by the whole aspect of this in astrology. So I thought, well, I'm feeling like I did in that time period in November. So let me just look that up in the ephemeris and see what was going on. And I
Hmm.
found that Jupiter Venus square in there, and I thought, wow, there's a recurring transit. And isn't that interesting? Because this is it's like it wasn't necessarily a tension feeling, it was like a rebirth type feeling. It's feeling like
Okay.
back in my game again, so to speak.
So
So,
this is it's also a phase recurrence. So for the audio people, we're looking at in the natal chart, Venus is in Leo, squaring Jupiter within a few degrees in Scorpio, and in the transiting chart, Venus is in mid Libra, squaring Jupiter pretty closely in the middle of Capricorn.
mhm.
So what was going on at that time?
I had just gone through I was still in a separation at that point, but from an 18-year second marriage. And I was
Hmm.
pretty upset about it, but I was starting to feel much, much better. Like I was back, like I said, like I had a little spring in my step again. And I was in San Francisco at the time visiting my daughter who had just moved out there. So that was in, as I said, November and at the actual, I know the actual date on that one, as far as when the transit occurred, was the 10th of November, because I found that in the ephemeris.
Ephemeris.
So that got me looking at this whole thing. So then when I saw that you guys were going to be doing this thing today, I said, well, let me look at the rest of those Venus Jupiters while I have some time this morning. So I looked at them, and the Venus square Jupiter occurred on the day that my daughter was born when you and I don't think I gave you that date, but the day my daughter was born in 1968 was November 14th. And sure enough, it's on that same date that that's a square of Venus and Jupiter. So if you look at that,
Hmm.
oh yes, there you go.
Yep. Yep.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So Jupiter's at 29 Virgo and Venus is at 29 Sagittarius.
Mm-hmm.
So your daughter was born at, yeah, that's beautiful. And that's even more beautiful just because the natal signature itself is Venus in Leo, square Jupiter in Scorpio in the fifth house. So it's like, it's almost like we were seeing this in some of the examples that it was sometimes activating the natal placement of the planets when the recurrence happened.
Mm-hmm.
There's also basically, I mean, in your case, you have Mars Uranus conjunct out of sign, and she's got Mars Uranus conjunct. So there's something there, I'd say.
Yes, there's something
There's
there.
still a Mars Uranus theme. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think her son Uranus is also sextile like mine is. Because I was
Hmm.
starting to look at those, some other examples of things in my chart. And I didn't get too far with that because here we are in line. So anyway, um,
Yeah, nearly.
so then flash forward 1973, April 29, 1973, I have my other child.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, and there we go.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I noticed this morning when I was looking at the AstroSeek that you gave us to look at,
Hmm.
that he also has this signature in his birth chart. It's not as exact as my daughter and I, but it's pretty close. Well, it's probably is about as far away as mine is, I think.
Yeah, so
So,
Venus is at 14 Taurus and it's square Jupiter at 10 Aquarius. So yeah, it's just a another Venus
Hmm.
Jupiter square.
hmm
Beautiful. Yeah, that's incredible. And again, it's with children again, sort of hearkening back to the natal Jupiter placement in the fifth house.
so then I'm looking through the rest of these, and there's a lot of them. There was like for Venus with her retrogrades, like
Right.
every other year, she's got like there's usually three hits, 2 to 3 hits every other year of Venus Jupiter squares. So
Hmm.
anyway, I find another one that's significant. And it's December 21st, 2011. And on that night, my daughter was moving back from San Francisco after having been out there 16 years. She had asked her brother to drive her back. She had just secured a new vehicle for the trip. And they got as far as Wyoming, and a snowstorm, or like snow, enough snow started to make a ramp on an expressway very slippery. And the car slid and went underneath a semi on the side of the semi. So here's this Mini Cooper going under a semi
Mm.
from the side. They both survived. She had some bruises. He had nothing. And
Wow.
the insurance adjuster said, it's amazing that you survived this accident at all. And they were, I mean, the injuries were really very minor. And so there's that same Venus Jupiter square again on that day.
Right. That's
Amazing.
incredibly
So
lucky,
that's why I sent
basically.
it to when you were asking for examples. I thought, well, here's a good one. At least it is to
Yep.
me. I mean, it's very significant to me. It's hard to talk about it because they are everything to me, these two kids. And
Yeah.
I almost lost them both
Thank
that
you.
night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, and it's crazy how that's tied together your family so that because the three of you have that recurrence, like sometimes an important family event, obviously for all three of you is happening at the same time when that recurrence happens. So that's an interesting additional facet of how the technique can work and what the implications can be. That's interesting to me. Could you remind me what the original event was that we looked at in the first
We looked at
recurrence?
November 10 of 1996.
90s.
Okay. And what was the event again?
It was just me feeling, okay, it was me in November of 25, someday, I don't remember when. It was after I watched your first podcast about the recurring transits.
Hmm.
So I was just having a feeling one day, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to look in the ephemeris because I remember this feels like November of 96. So what had happened to me in November of 96 is I just felt like I was having like a mini rebirth or something. I was going through a separation and it had hit me really hard. And
Mm,
I was in San Francisco and I just started to feel like I was turning a corner and coming back to myself again. So
nice.
for some reason
Okay.
back in
Nice.
November, I had that feeling again. It's been a rough couple of years. I think the whole Saturn, Neptune, uh,
Right.
Pisces has been just really, it's been a difficult one for me. So anyway,
Mm.
coming back out of that, I had a feeling. I looked in the ephemeris. I found this natal Venus, or I was looking to see what was there a recurring transit for me during this time, and bingo, there it was. It was
Yeah.
Venus square Jupiter. So that got me on that track, and then I found these other ones that I
I
hadn't
love that.
Great job.
I
really
love that
noticed.
also because it's a signature you might otherwise overlook,
Yes,
but it's important. It's like because so often as modern astrologers, sometimes we'll look to the really like, big outer planet aspects or things like that to look for some of the most crucial things. But one of the things this technique I think is pointing us to is that sometimes aspects we might otherwise overlook can be just as important. In this instance, this Venus-Jupiter square runs through your entire family and some of your family chronology, but then also in this instance, it's a really important personal, like internal event and transformation that you're going on that's happening in your life that's kind of being signaled by this particular one in 1996.
I can add one more event that was a really devastating event around this thing. And this goes to March 21st, 1991.
Okay.
There
Hmm.
was an
I see it.
altercation. I was at work and there was an altercation at my home. their stepdad had gotten into a fight with my son. My son was 17 years old at that point. He was just about 18, but wasn't quite yet. And they had gotten into a fight, and my son had called the police, and the police had come over and arrested my husband, which was your stepdad. And that
Mm,
started a really, really long, difficult time period in which the two of them were not getting along, obviously, for, that because that had happened. He resented that the police had been called, and I was trying to make peace between everybody and so that everything would go back to the way it used to be, but that was not possible.
mm,
So anyway,
mm.
I'm just
Th-
adding that one in because that popped up in
yeah.
this list of
This one
this
is
recurring transit.
This one has a distinction because in this one, Saturn is worked into a T square. It's opposite Jupiter, it's square Venus. So, Jupiter and Venus don't get to have their usual familial square, there's this outside agent. I mean, that's what the Saturn is your husband, who is going to feel resentful because the police are called and so on and so forth. And of course, your son was having a recurrence transit when this is not just you, but he is as well.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and
He is as
and
well.
that's yeah, and that Saturn's in the picture there. So yeah, I mean,
Right.
that's where you can see where these variations work their way into recurrence transits. If you do have an agent like that, that can be the difference between turning a usually, friendlier configuration into something that suddenly does impact the whole family because all three of you had that. Well, all three of you are having the recurrence transit. It would impact your daughter, even if it was your son who got in the fight. So, yeah,
Hmm.
that's the other side to it for sure.
Yeah, there was a lot of stuff going on here too. It's like Pluto is almost exactly conjunct Jupiter in the fifth house, and transiting Mars is conjoining Uranus in the 12th. And yeah, this
South Node
was
crossing the ascendant. Yeah, the South Node crossing the ascendant. That's very much about like things that other people are doing or things that are happening to other people in turn impact you. Like you're not there,
mm.
you have nothing to do with it, and yet it's, you're totally involved as well.
Hmm.
So you said this was important because you wanted things to go back to normal after this, but they maybe didn't, or that this was a pretty important turning point.
It was a huge turning point. Nothing was ever the same after that. It was kind of the beginning of the end.
Got
Mm.
it. And this is the
Yeah.
relationship that ended in like
Hmm.
96.
Right. It's the relationship that ended in 96.
Hmm.
And between 91 and 96, it was always very tense. My son was ordered out of the house, and it was relatively convenient at that point for him to leave and go to college because that's what he did. But
Hmm.
it was very tense whenever he was back home again. So,
Got it. Yeah, that's tough. All right. Well, those are some really good examples in that. Yeah, we might have to do a whole episode, Nick, about like family recurrences, because it seems like this is
Mm.
coming up as a really strong thing in some of these examples with these signatures.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've seen it a bunch. No doubt we could cobble together a pretty fascinating collection of examples.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that, Connie. I really
thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you,
We really
Connie.
appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was
All right.
fantastic. Thank you.
All right. Take care. All right. Yeah, we're learning a bunch. There's so many different like facets of this technique and ways that it can be applied and things that arise naturally, like different avenues of research as you start looking things up and looking at different chronologies.
Yeah, yeah. I know. It keeps on giving.
The gift that keeps on giving. Okay.
Yeah. These have been
We're
fantastic though.
yeah, these have been some really good examples. So we're
No
at
duds.
no, everyone was great. Thank you everybody for sharing your examples. We're at 2 hours, so that might be about as much as we can do for today. Does anybody have any questions though about recurrence transits in general that we maybe could do a little Q&A if anybody has any questions about recurrence transits or the application of the technique or anything like that before we wrap up here for the day? Let me know in the live chat if you do. Um, Let me just scroll through and see what some of the other comments were up to this point. What are some other, are there any other like weird, mysterious facets of the recurrence transit technique, Nick, that we ha either haven't explored yet or that could make for like future episodes?
Um, well, I mean, the other thing I was sort of hinting at earlier, the idea that we might be able to break different combinations down into their own identifiable cycles. You know, there could be a cycle to Mars-Pluto conjunctions and et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, I mean, that's where I would ultimately be headed in exploring this material, is trying to get to that as a destination. I don't know if it would be the next episode, but I think working our way there is really fruitful.
Of breaking it down into cycles between the planets and looking at the full cycle between two planets and important events playing out within that. Sort of, I mean, we did one example of that with Biden, where it was like he had a Saturn Uranus
Uranus, yeah,
conjunction, and then every like hard aspect of Saturn Uranus like kept coming up as like
right.
on the opposition of Saturn Uranus, like the day of it, he became vice president. And then on the square, I think he became president, and it kept being really
Hmm.
dramatic.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good example. But Saturn and Uranus, that's relatively easy. They're both slow moving planets. You could do the same thing with the faster ones as well, and maybe really get a sense of you know another layer of just how dense you can get with the faster moving planets and their combinations and following them over a lifetime.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Shannon says if you're experiencing a recurrence transit, you use the solar return to determine its theme, correct? I'm in a recurrence transit that also occurs in my solar return. No, I mean, you don't have to use the solar return for the recurrence transit technique, but it might be more significant in certain instances if it is happening in the solar return chart, just because then it means you're in one of those years, I think that's kind of important as a repetition year that also involves the sun, right?
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking to Lauren, she's about to turn 32. She has a Venus Mars square. We were talking about Venus Mars square, so it seemed appropriate to say, "Hey, by the way, you have this birthday coming up." So that's one that you can see coming. Anyone who's got any kind of dynamic aspect between Venus and Mars, you immediately know you want to look at the 32nd birthday. There's certain birthdays that are like that already have an implied double cyclical return happening at a certain age, like Mars Jupiter at 47 or Venus Mercury at 40. There's just certain birthdays that have those planetary returns. But what I'm talking about is an extension of that, looking at
Right,
all of
right.
them. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, and that's something I was talking to Patrick about doing is we've been threatening to do the like Babylonian Goal Year episode for a couple of years now, but I think we're almost at that point where it might be time to do that because those cycles have become more clear and I've stacked up quite a bit of examples at this point. Um, yeah, so that might be one of the next episodes in terms of research episodes to do is the goal years, since that's kind of adjacent to things like the 32-year cycle of Venus and Mars, for example.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yep.
Is there any other questions? Are there, Karina says, are there repetitions of the same story when it comes to the sign that they are recurring at, like with transits? Um, Nick, what do you think?
Well, not always, but we certainly saw, like with Lauren's car accidents, for instance, and other accidents. But that to me was more of an amazing outlier than what is typical. The theme is usually more loose than that, but still, there will be a theme relating to the planets. That's the part that's consistent. But I wouldn't say it's a repetition of the same event for everyone. Um, Lauren, notwithstanding.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just not understanding the thrust of the question. But yeah, I think that makes sense. Um, okay, cool. Well, that was the last question that we received from our live audience, so I think that's it. Awesome. Well, I'm glad we did this. This is a nice, as we're exploring this technique, like learning more about it and trying to find more examples. And if people are watching this or listening to this episode, once I've released it, if you have a good example of a recurrence transit, then let us know by sharing it in the YouTube comments below this video on YouTube. And I'm hoping in the future, because I want to put out like a mass call for examples and then maybe do an episode where we just read, you and I, Nick, just read and discuss some of the submissions that are sent in for us, whether it's a recurrence transit in a person's birth chart, or if somebody notices like a celebrity example with a recurrence transit, could be cool as well. So let us know in the YouTube comments. And if people would like us to do another follow-up and keep exploring this technique, definitely let us know in the comments as well. And then we'll maybe come back and do another episode. All right, my friend, thanks for joining me today. Your website where you do recurrence transit consultations is nickdaganbestastrologer.com, right?
Correct. I am available, and yeah, I use recurrence transits in consultations all the time. It's a regular staple.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, people should definitely check out your website and get a consultation with you if they want to learn more about the technique. And sometimes it's help, as we've seen here today, it's helpful sometimes to have some guidance as you're like working through and trying to understand your recurrence transits, because sometimes having another astrologer look at your chart can give you a perspective that is different, that can shed a little bit extra light on something. And I think that's always useful for different astrologers of any level, just to get a different perspective sometimes. All right.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching or listening to this episode of the Astrology Podcast, and we'll see you again next time. If you're a fan of the podcast and you want to get access to bonus content, then become a patron through my page on Patreon, where you can get early access to new episodes, attend live recordings and webinars, access the monthly Electional Astrology Podcast, the Secret Astrology Podcast that's only available to patrons, or you can even get your name listed in the credits. Find out more at patreon.com/astrologypodcast. Special thanks to the patrons on our producers tier, including patrons Christy Moe, Ariana Amour, Mandy Ray, Angelique Nambo, Isa Sabah, Jeannie Marie Kaplan, Melissa Delano, Sunny Bozbaz, Kwatsi Alabarahu, Annie Newman, Ginger Sodlier, Berlin West, and Nikki Crawford. If you're looking for good dates to do things this year, then be sure to check out our 2026 Electional Astrology Report, which is a guide to the most fortunate dates in 2026. You can get it at theastrologypodcast.com/2026 report. If you're really looking to take your studies of astrology to the next level, then consider signing up for my Hellenistic Astrology course, which is an online course in ancient astrology where I take people from basic concepts up through intermediate and advanced techniques for reading birth charts. There's over 100 hours of video lectures, plus live webinars and Q&A sessions each month, and at the end of the course, you get a certificate of completion saying that you studied with me. Find out more information at theastrologyschool.com. If you're looking to get an astrological consultation, then check out the new consultations page on the podcast website, where I have a list of astrologers I recommend for birth chart readings and other types of consultations. You can find that at theastrologypodcast.com/consultations. The astrology software we use and recommend here on the podcast is called SolarFire for Windows, and you can get a 15% discount on it by using the promo code AP15 at the website alabe.com. For Mac users, we recommend the program called AstroGold for Mac OS, and you can use the promo code AstroPodcast15 to get a 15% discount at their website, which is astrogold.io. And shout out to our sponsors for this episode, including the Northwest Astrology Conference, which is happening in Seattle and being live streamed online May 21st through the 25th, 2026. Find out more information at norwac.net, as well as the United Astrology Conference, which is happening in Chicago this year, September 3rd through the 9th, 2026. Find out more information about that at uacastrology.com.